Hey y'all, we are live. We have Danielle D'souza, who has been a phenomenal advocate, pro-life advocate. You might know her as Dinesh D'Souza's beautiful daughter. She has been active as a pro-life advocate, as also in America First. She is truly an incredible voice in the conservative movement. And she wrote a book called The Choice. And I read this whole book, believe it or not, and I was just really amazed at how well she put in virtually every argument we've heard about abortion into one concise book. And she really interweaved literature, pop cultural references, so it's very relatable. And I think that, parents with high schoolers, would be a great book for them to get a hold of and dive into. And it's backed with great scientific sourcing. Really great book, Danielle. So I just want to commend you for your excellent work.
It's called The Choice, right?
Yes, it's called The Choice. I'll just show it here. It's The Choice, awesome. The Abortion Divide in America. There is a Nicholas Sparks book called The Choice, so that is not this. That would be your beach read. This would be your intense read. And thank you guys for having me on the show and for reading the book.
Definitely. I love your Twitter feed too, by the way. So anybody watching on YouTube, the link to her book is in the About section for you to purchase it on Amazon. So it's a great book. We'll dive in now on the subjects. I'll turn it over to you on abortion.
So I think we should just start off with the science right away because, this is a great, we hear people on the left just shout out the science, listen to the experts. In your book, what does the science and what do the experts say about fetal pain, about the new science that has been available since Roe?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. There's kind of like the history side and the science side. So the American Medical Association for a long time leading up to Roe v. Wade was clearly, saying that this is a life. But then it kind of got a little bit politicized, and they actually testified kind of in favor of the abortion side in Roe v. Wade. So there was like some politicizing of that. But the actual science itself, with what we really look into when we step out of the abortion debate, when we look at, when does the baby feel pain? When is it viable outside the womb? All of these things, we have so much more knowledge than we do now than in the time of Roe v. Wade. We can actually see the child in the womb. We can hear the heartbeat a few weeks in. The baby can survive on its own really for almost the entire third trimester outside the womb. So, and even if we look at embryology, even if we look at kind of, what do we know about this unique DNA? What do we know about this unique life? We can say that this is definitely its own person. It's not a body part. It's not kind of, an appendix. It's not an extension of the woman. It's not identical to her. It's its own being. And we actually know from the moment of conception, its sex, its DNA. We know kind of its makeup. It doesn't change over time. Everything that's human is human from the beginning. It doesn't become more human. It's not like at the point of birth we have a human poof and all of a sudden, it comes out of nowhere, and before that it was nothing. No, we're really just kind of shifting its location from in the womb to out of the womb, whether that's through kind of a normal birth or through C-section. It's really just a matter of location that we're talking about.
Right. Yeah. So you're talking about, the stress hormone of cortisol being released, that we've witnessed through the act of abortion, but also in surgery where, it's worth noting that the baby in a surgical procedure is a patient. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the cortisol you're mentioning, so people often talk about, abortion, but we don't actually really know what it's like from the perspective of the child that's going through being aborted. And it actually does release the same stress hormones that we release, like cortisol, when it's under duress, when it's in pain. And we actually see with the suction method of ultrasound, you can see on the ultrasound when the suction goes towards the child, it tries to get away in the womb. You can watch it happen. And even for third trimester abortions, late term abortions, they don't anesthetize the infant. We know without question that the child feels pain. And unfortunately, when it goes through this dismemberment, it doesn't have any anesthesia, which I think we would find to be horrible. And it actually doesn't die instantly. It can sometimes take an hour. It can sometimes take a day. And it's a very painful process. I know it's horrible to hear it. I know it's a horrible thing that's going on. But I think that we have to be honest when we're actually talking about this. If we want to talk about, the infant and what it's going through as far as feeling pain.
Yeah, I have a question about abortion that has sort of bothered me for a long time, and it's that I feel like a lot of times the left likes to turn abortion into a discussion of really rare occurrences. So, like, let's say the medical necessity of, like, there is a baby that has died already in the womb and has to be removed, and they refer to that as a reason why abortion needs to be legal. In my mind, I think we need to have different medical terminology for cases like that, because I'm entirely pro-life. I'm against abortion. But obviously, in those scenarios where there's a child who has tragically died, calling that an abortion, or where they have, like, that type of scenario going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if the child is dead, really you just need to deliver it, and that would then be called a stillbirth, because unfortunately the child has died of natural causes, and it's kind of like a miscarriage. I mean, that is dying of a natural cause, so that's completely different from targeting the child with digoxin and piercing its heart and piercing its brain and causing its life to end and dismembering it. Delivering a child alive, or delivering a child that has unfortunately died is a different situation.
Why do you think they get away with pretending like they're the same thing?
I actually haven't heard them ask too much about stillbirth, because actually doctors do consider the birth of a stillbirth to be a real child. They actually have the mother give the child a name, they measure it, they kind of write those things down, and it's all kind of treated very much as a normal birth. But it's of course a tragic situation, because you are birthing a child that is dead. But this would not be an abortion situation, because there was no abortion procedure that ever took place. But if someone on the left was kind of using this as some kind of talk point argument or something to justify abortion, I would just say that you're talking about delivery. There was no actual abortion that took place. Nobody actually performed the abortion procedure.
Yeah.
So I just don't really see how they could bring that up.
Right.
What do you think about ectopic? My mouth isn't working today. Pregnancies.
Yeah, I do look at that a little bit as well. And I think that it's actually really interesting, because there isn't enough being done to talk about removing an ectopic pregnancy and putting it into the right location. We have such advanced technology as far as actually like IVF, all of those things, which is a whole other discussion. But I think that, the left is really just pushing abortion. So they don't actually want doctors to be able to work on kind of fixing the situation to bring out a life-saving situation. We just want to bring kind of a death situation and say, oh, just abort and, just try to have a kid. There was actually a story in England that I looked at of a woman who said, I literally could not get pregnant. I tried so many times to get pregnant, could not happen. This was the one time I got pregnant. It was ectopic. She did have her child. It was healthy, normal child. That's very rare. But I would just say that I think we should try to strive towards a life-saving situation where we can, move to, we're not just pushing abortion. And she basically said, look, I'm going to let it be there. And if it does get to a point where, I'm not okay anymore, then I guess we'll go to that. But that didn't happen for her. So anyways, I just think that we should try to go towards a life-saving situation for both people.
That's a good answer.
Right. And to my understanding, most pro-life legislation is very practical, meaning that there are carve-outs for these rare, extenuated medical circumstances and anomalies, where for a woman like who, the baby is, the impregnated into the fallopian tube and it's growing, and there's no way to have that baby safely without putting the mother's life at direct risk. I mean, removing that, why is that not called like a medical removal? Why is that called an abortion? And I'm pretty sure it isn't, because I have a friend who went in to a doctor for that same thing, and they didn't say, okay, thanks for, showing up for your abortion. Let's go get your abortion. They called it a medical procedure, and they were saving the mom's life, and they took the baby out, and it was, a dignified experience. It wasn't the intentional murder of a child for the purpose of convenience, which, conflating this language, I think, is the biggest headway the abortion movement has made. How do we fight back on language? And can you clarify any of those things that I said if they're inaccurate?
Yeah, well, even if you look at third trimester abortions, the left always says, Hillary Clinton says this. She says that, oh, well, there could be a medical situation, there could be an emergency where you would need to have an abortion and so on. But the reality is there would never be a need for an abortion at that point. Early delivery, yes, where you remove the child is going to have to come out no matter what. You have a large child there. So this child's either going to be alive or not alive, but you have to remove it. So there's no reason to, as I said, kind of pierce that child with a poison, dismember that child and remove it. Now you could remove it and maybe it doesn't live through that. Maybe afterwards it's not able to and so on. But I think you should try to give it the care that you would any patient. This is health care, not a killing operation, or at least it shouldn't be, and then go from there. I'm not saying that we can save every person, but I think we should try to save, both people. And if the child does need to be delivered early, then that would be up to the doctor to decide if it needs to be delivered. But I think the left likes to act like, oh, this child has to be killed. We have to have abortion even at this point. And there's just no need for that.
And many doctors are complicit in that. We actually have a viewer now who's saying that their wife had an ectopic pregnancy and they weren't given the option of relocating the baby. They were just told that the only thing you could do was removal. So, the fact that is happening to people is, it really kind of backs up your point that a lot of this stuff is being pushed in only one direction. That's the direction of killing children. So, I just think.
Yeah, and it's a tragedy too that the plight of women with these rare medical circumstances are being used to reinforce entirely elective and abortions. So that's something that, I think that we could do a better job of fighting for that language back. And I think that, you do a great job in this book about breaking down other myths. And so I kind of wanted to just go over that and viewers can get more, because you cover this so deeply. So I don't want to microwave your responses, but if you could just, as brief as you can, kind of go over some of these myths for any viewers who might be listening. The typical, let's start with back alley abortions, that myth. If it's not legal, people are going to resort to coat hanger abortions and more women's lives are going to be endangered. Let's go there.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the most popular myths, just because that's where the left always likes to go when they want to use scare tactics. They want to make it out like, women are going to be in the back alley with the coat hanger and so on. But I would say two things. Number one, the numbers that they were saying were going on as far as back alley abortions before Roe v. Wade were completely exaggerated. Bernard Nathanson, who is head of NARAL, wrote about this. He said that they explicitly lied about it. It was actually extremely rare that women were doing that. But regardless, even if we look at today, if we look at what's happening now, this is actually already happening. Even in places where they allow 9-month abortions without a medical reason, women are doing this. And I look at this book, it's called, actually, I won't say the word because it's a bad word, but the woman's name is Inga Muscio, and she's this radical leftist. She basically does abortions at home, and it's not the coat hanger situation today. They basically use kind of these weird wellness teas and do all these weird exercises and incantations and stuff, and then they abort their children at home. And they're kind of a group of women that do this. Anyway, so I think that if abortion was, restricted or not allowed in some way, except for rare exceptions, there would still be very strange people like her who would be doing it in that fashion. They're also pushing this in magazines, websites, magazines like Teen Vogue really write about to young girls, here's how you can do your abortion at home. Like, here's how you can get abortion pills and take them home and all this stuff. So what back alley abortions would actually look like today, I think that if that were the case, I don't think people would be getting surgical abortions just because there would be no need for that kind of late-term abortion. And also, I don't think doctors would want to put themselves at risk, put the woman at risk, and so on. So maybe there would be some kind of back alley abortion pill situation for the early stages. But even then, I think they would market it as kind of a wellness technique. So that's kind of the reality of what I think back alley abortions would look like. But again, I think that it'd be very rare. And I think people would honestly probably try to use more contraception.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's worth pointing out that there's never a need. I mean, there's never a need for abortion, but the late-term abortion is a whole other thing, because at that point, the baby can survive with medical intervention. So the need to kill is not a need. And so I think that's another mistake people make, when you're arguing with them about abortion, and you're having this conversation and they're saying up until birth, that's really not about anybody's mental health. There's any of those reasons that they use to basically justify killing them. There's never a medical need or reason. Early delivery, yes, but to kill a baby that is viable with medical intervention, there's just no justification at all that you could even entertain having. So, and you talked about that in your book. And so I was going to ask about, these other rare instances like rape and incest, pregnant children. They like to go straight to these extreme circumstances, even though I think you said it's less than 2% of abortions are due to these extreme circumstances. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, they all break down differently. Incest is, I think, less than 0.01%. Children is less than 1%. So again, these are all extremely rare. But I think that they like to go there to make it out like all abortion is this. And then I would say to them, okay, well, are you against all abortion and 99% of the time except for these? They would, of course, say no, we're okay with abortion on demand, abortion for any reason. And of course, the kind of laws that we have allow for basically any reason. But yeah, of course, I think those are really important to dive into just because we actually are on the right side in this. I think, let's say we look at something like rape. I would treat incest, very similarly. If that person is underage, they can't consent. So with the situation of rape, I would say that, the left really argues for the death penalty for the child, but I would advocate for the death penalty for the rapist. I think the problem is the rapist. The rapist is the one who should pay for this. And any woman I've ever talked to who has been through a sexual assault is like, I want this rapist off the street. I don't want to, see this person again, and they should be punished and so on. And I agree they should be punished. So I just don't understand why the left would defend that person or say we should have lighter sentences on murderers and rapists as opposed to the innocent child. So I think the solution is really keeping this from occurring in the first place in order to stop that by keeping them off the streets. But if that horrible thing did occur, then I would say that, the child was innocent in that and had no part in it. None of us get to choose, how we come into this world. But if she finds that child painful to look at and so on, I would understand. And I would think that, adoption would be a great solution just because then another family could raise it who doesn't view it in that light or in that situation. And there are also closed adoptions where it's completely anonymous. So the parties don't stay in touch or anything like that. And I think then the woman could move on and heal from that situation, knowing that there wasn't kind of another fallout with regarding the child after that horrible instance.
Right. Which would then bring them to, but what about all those foster care children?
Yeah. I think the left, they just love to act like certain people are better off dead, whether you live in a bad area, you have bad parents, maybe you're a foster child, all of this. And the reality is that if you talk to any of those people, someone who was brought into this world in that way or who lives in that neighborhood, they would never say, oh, I wish I was dead. So I don't think that's the solution. Abortion doesn't actually improve our foster care situation. I think a way that we could actually improve it is by fostering adoptions. It's actually really tough to adopt. It takes sometimes a year, more than that to adopt. It can be expensive. A lot of families have to go abroad to adopt. There are about 35 families waiting for every child available to be adopted. So there are children in foster care who could absolutely be adopted. So I think the best solution for those children is actually to have a long-term family, to have a permanent home. So I think we should be funding adoption, not abortion.
Yeah, and with that said, I want to point out too that it's a different pool of people entirely. Families that want to have their own baby that they're raising from birth and having that experience is a different cause than somebody who is adopting a child who has significant trauma or things like that. They're both noble, but they're different. And what people, I think, don't understand about the foster care children is that the goal of the whole foster care welfare system is reunification, of family reunification. And that's a tedious process, and we don't necessarily want to incentivize those adoptions when that they still have parents actively trying to get them back, and there's so much abuse rife within that system itself. It's a whole other conversation that we've covered on our show, but they're two different needs entirely. It's like arguing over breast cancer versus colon cancer. They're different needs entirely. But you're absolutely right that there is plenty of families just waiting to adopt an infant. There is a need for that. There is not a surplus of infants available for adoption. So that argument just completely, falls flat. What did you want to talk about, Planned Parenthood?
No, actually, I was going to talk about the Born Alive bill. So, Republicans have the Born Alive bill to protect babies that are born alive, to be treated as patients the way they should be. And Democrats claim that this isn't a real thing, that doesn't happen. So my question is, why do Democrats refuse to humor us and just vote on it and vote for it if it's something that doesn't happen and they agree that babies should be, treated like a living human being when they are a living human being when they're born? So why do you think that is? Why are Democrats, what kind of game are they playing here?
Right. I mean, it absolutely does happen. There are people who have talked about this. There are people who've literally survived being aborted. They have lived to tell the tale to this day. So this idea that it doesn't happen at all is wrong. Now, is it rare? Of course, I'm sure it's rare, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't protect these lives. Every life is a life. And so saying that you can kill this child outside the womb, I mean, first of all, I would say that many Democrats don't even want to defend this child outside the womb or, have any legal protection, just because they know that it raises people's eyebrows to think, oh, what about moments before when it's inside the womb? Or what about when it's halfway outside the womb? When does this child actually gain its rights? So when they talk about birth isn't like 1 second. It's a whole process. So when would it be considered born alive? They don't want abortionists to have to be liable or deal with, maybe I killed this child outside the womb and so on, because they know that if they kill it right inside the womb, they're completely scot-free. That was healthcare and so on. Whereas if it's outside of the womb, it would be murder. Now, we totally can see why this makes really no sense, but then that leads us to believe, how come you can kill it right inside the womb or halfway out the womb? And so they don't want that discussion opened up. They don't want people thinking more about this. So they just say, oh no, this situation would never exist. Well, as long as you allow abortion up to birth, or abortion, at any point where the child could be delivered, then you are going to face this problem. So yeah, I think that unfortunately they don't really care about the child in the womb or out of the womb, because they care so much about defending abortion that they're not willing to even defend those children.
Right. That's really good point. So with Planned Parenthood, I think people have this idea that they're a women's healthcare service provider, and you really broke that down really well in your book, about how that the majority of their services really revolve around abortion. In fact, Lena Wen, I believe, former head of Planned Parenthood, said as such. How does Planned Parenthood operate? Are they essentially working for the Democrat Party?
Yeah, I mean, they have a whole political arm, and when they say they're a healthcare organization, I'm thinking, okay, well, St. Jude's Hospital doesn't operate like you guys do. They literally have operatives on the ground who are ready to show up at any given instance. They need to protest the Supreme Court. They need to, do marches and so on. They're definitely a political operation, and 100% of any donation they've given to a political candidate has only been for Democrats. They don't donate to Republicans in any way. And the Democrats really fund them as well. Basically, there's this whole circle where Democrats tap into celebrities like Ariana Grande and say, hey, make sure that you start talking about voting for Biden, and then also talk about voting, in favor of women's rights, and then donate your funds from a concert and so on to Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is then going to donate funds to Biden. Biden's then going to include you and his cool stuff he's doing and so on. So they're all really in league with the same agenda, which is to push abortion on demand and market it as a positive good, as something to be celebrated, as something that pushes women's empowerment. And so that's Planned Parenthood's goal.
You touch on Hollywood there. Coming from that world, I can't tell you how many sick stories I've heard from people saying that abortion is the reason that they were able to do what they were going to do. We saw it just recently at the Oscars with, what's her name? Michelle Williams.
Yeah, she wrote about that.
Yeah, she went up there and essentially said, all of my career achievements can be attributed to the fact that I had abortions. That idea to me, this isn't really a question, it's more of a statement. That idea to me is just so sick. Like going up on stage and saying, having my baby ripped limb from limb in the most graphic way possible made it possible for me to get this shiny piece of metal, I can't imagine a more disgusting, debasing, just horrible, evil thing to do. I don't think that hunks of metal and awards are worth a child's life, and Hollywood does. And I think that says everything very clearly in terms of what they worship and what is important to them. So that's just a note from me. I do have a question, though, about something totally different. I found something really interesting. I was doing research, was going through Pew Poll about abortion. This is a while back. And I was surprised to find that more women were pro-life than men. Because at least in the Pew poll, and that extrapolated across the couple other polls I could find. So it made me very curious about, the messaging I've always received in life is that women were, the ones that were pushing abortion more so than anybody else in every facet. But the reality was that men were more pro-abortion. And I think psychologically that's because men have been sold this idea that we're not allowed to have an opinion on abortion. So the default is to be pro-abortion, because if you're not pro-abortion, then you're not pro-woman. And that's what men have been messaged to with. And so I'm wondering, how do you think we can change that messaging with men to empower them to be pro-life? Because the more women were pro-life than men.
Yeah, and I actually write about that a little bit in my book about how actually men in many ways, bad men in any way, like abortion, because it kind of fuels the patriarchy and allows them to kind of use women as sex objects and sleep with them whenever they want, and then give them a couple $100 to go get an abortion. But then the woman is stuck, on a Saturday on a surgical table or at home in her bathroom, going through a lot of pain, and then has to deal with the emotional pain of, this abortion, which could haunt her forever. And so it definitely doesn't empower women to get an abortion, or to even make it so that men and women are more equal, or men and women are somehow, on the same playing field. And I think too, when they kind of bring up this idea that you couldn't have this statue, or you couldn't achieve this or achieve that if you didn't have an abortion or something, it's just not even true. There are so many successful women who are mothers. And I think also there are many people who should believe that, men actually should be more involved. Men should step up. And the left acts like they say that. They're like, oh, we want, men involved. We want them to do household work and all of this stuff. But then it's okay, but you don't actually want them to be fathers. You don't actually want them to be involved in family. You just want them to pay you to get an abortion, which it just doesn't really make any sense. And so I think if we actually want to empower women and actually, kind of bring men to the same level as women, not, equal in terms of kind of the abortion, disgustingness, make us both equally kind of engaged in something gross, but equally in a good place, then I think that would be a culture of life, not a culture of death.
Yeah, the left, with fathers, they really treat fatherhood as optional. They don't treat it as something that should be a duty of every man who has a child. And I think the right does do that. But on the left, everything I see reflected from them in media and in the party and in policy is this idea that fatherhood is optional. And I think the statistics across the board on crime, on success, everything bear out that having a father is not optional. It's necessary to a healthy society. And, that the same, I guess that's part of what irritates me with abortion. There's a lot of things that do, but one of them is that fathers just essentially have no rights. They have no right to say, I don't want my child to be murdered. And that sounds crazy when you put it in those terms. What do you think it's going to take for fathers to have some right to protect their child?
Yeah, I mean, I did look into that a little bit. I looked at this man named Brad Allen, who unfortunately fought for his child, but his partner really wanted to abort it, and she did anyways. And he had to go down this long search to find his child's death certificate, which showed, here's the abortionist who aborted it. And he actually went through a lot of counseling and found that that was really what helped him heal from the situation, because many people who lose a child, they have a sense of, even PTSD if it was an abortion situation like this, where they weren't able to save the child, they weren't able to do that, and they feel very helpless. but that actually helps them with healing, to have closure and kind of moving on. And unfortunately, many men never get that because they're completely ignored. And this procedure is basically treated like, quote, a healthcare procedure. So even though there's a dead body, even though there's a corpse, it's not buried, it's not treated oftentimes with dignity. And I know there have been kind of cases like that have come up high to the Supreme Court, but it's really going to take, I think, an overturning of Roe v. Wade in order for there to ever be kind of a move towards even seeing this child as a person with rights, in order to then see the father as a person with parental rights. If we look at even cases like when there's an embryo outside of the womb, there actually are rights for both parties and so on. So this idea that we shouldn't have rights when it comes to someone who has half your DNA, it's really, really ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that, going back to that patriarchy argument, I think that really the absolvement of responsibility starts essentially with sex education, where as far as I know, and all the sex ed that I've read and that I experienced when I was in school, they do not say that a man has to, the male has to use protection. They say, somebody has to use protection, or, you have to use birth control, but they don't say that he's responsible for his parts and you're responsible for your body. There's a complete, just write-off for
again they put no, it's even worse than that, because they put it on women to do. I remember in sex ed in public school, what they did, they didn't teach boys you should wear a condom. Mm-hmm. They said, girls, make sure that when you choose to have sex with somebody, that you ask your partner to wear a condom. It again puts it on the girl to ask. And so the default for a boy is, if she doesn't ask, I'm not going to wear one. Mm-hmm. That's what I was taught in public school.
Or it's prioritizing.
So I think that's worse.
It's prioritizing pleasure, whereas it's not comfortable for me. You're on the birth control pill, so we're good, and that's not accurate. It's not medically sound. It's not scientifically accurate. And we know from prevention statistics and abortion statistics that that's not panning out. So I think it goes back to sex education. I mean, what do you think?
Right. And I think, too, just kind of this whole idea that, men don't have to be responsible for being fathers. Women don't have to birth the baby. We'll just kind of kill the baby in the womb. I mean, as long as that's always there and treated as reproductive care, then I don't see why either party would say, oh, no, we have to always make sure we do this, or always, make sure all these things, because that is always kind of like a backup plan and fallback plan and so on. And so, I don't understand it. It doesn't really make sense. I think if abortion wasn't allowed, then people would absolutely say, like, okay, what time of month is it? Are we using a condom? Are we using birth control? So on, all of these other things. Yeah. Whereas now it's like, oh, well, hope you use this, but whatever.
Right. Essentially, you can get a drive-through abortion, and we saw during the first COVID weeks that essential services, they were supposed to not be operational, but they were. Can you talk about what happened during COVID? And I think you mentioned Ohio specifically. What happened there?
Yeah, I wrote about this in my book because it was during quarantine, and I was like, this is ridiculous. Other people are being forced by their governor to shelter in place, and Planned Parenthood is performing abortions and using PPE and having people crowded in places when oftentimes they are considered an elective service, an elective abortion, not a life-saving service. This is for people who just want to come in, and yet they're continuing to perform abortions. And many of their clinics actually said, hey, you know what, we're going to scale back, but we're actually going to scale back our other services. We're going to stop, the birth control stuff. We're going to stop the screenings. We're going to stop the STD stuff. We're just going to only do abortions because that's our bread and butter, and that's what we do. So Planned Parenthood absolutely centers everything they do around abortion. That is their core service. And they tack on these other things to it. They can kind of dilute the statistics and make it look like, oh, we don't do much abortion, when in reality, if you go in there to get an abortion, they're going to also at the same time say, here, take this, do this. And then it looks like, oh, I got 10 surgeries today, when actually you only got one surgery and then got a few other things to take home with you.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about like Planned Parenthood in general, just like the lies that they tell women and underage girls, about their services, about, what they do, we know they lie about organ trafficking. Can you talk a little bit about Planned Parenthood?
Yeah, definitely. There's so much to say. That's my longest chapter because there's just so much information on them. I'll say a couple things. One is they oppose showing women their ultrasound. Democrats also oppose laws that say women need to see their ultrasound. And this is because statistics show us that anytime a woman sees her ultrasound, she's much less likely to get an abortion. She's very likely to walk out of the clinic, maybe put her child up for adoption, and so on. But they don't want that. They want the woman to go in, get the abortion same day in that moment, not see the ultrasound. They oppose women having a 24-hour waiting period, maybe to talk to a family member or a friend or just think about it. They don't like that. They want it to happen in that second, so there is no time to think. And I guess I would just say that if you actually believe that this is a woman's body, or you actually believe this is healthcare, then why don't you want her to know about it if this is like any other procedure and you think women should be informed? Obviously they don't. And so they really operate by pulling the wool over women's eyes and getting them to do something that they would not otherwise do in a different circumstance. If they were given adoption options, if they did know that, maybe their partner would be there, or their grandparent or parent, or there was an adopted family, they could choose another option, but they don't like to give them those options either. And also say that Planned Parenthood really was born not out of women's empowerment or right to privacy or any of these other things. It came out of the eugenics movement. And Margaret Sanger basically started Planned Parenthood because she knew that this would be the most effective way to target what she calls human weeds. So anyone who is a minority, anyone who lives in an area that's poor, anyone who maybe has a disability, Down syndrome, she thinks, oh yeah, we should kill off those people. And the eugenics movement really started with people like her who had this fear of population control. So the left really kind of centers around this, and this is what a lot of these limousine liberal rich leftists believe in, like Bill Gates. They basically think, oh, in order for me to help the world and help myself and help the planet, I'm going to start getting rid of people and making sure we don't have as many people, so let's start killing off people. And that's kind of what they're doing with abortion. They're really marketing to certain communities, targeting certain communities, setting up their locations in certain places, and making it so that we do not have as many white babies aborted as black babies. More baby girls are aborted than baby boys. People sometimes wait to see their ultrasound and find the gender until they decide if they want to get an abortion. Oh, that's not what I wanted, and so on. So there is racism and sexism going on with abortion. There is sex selection.
Right. And also parents, you don't have to tell your parents. And that's the problem. Like Planned Parenthood is actively marketing that to children in their sex ed frameworks, where they have the right not to tell their parents. You can't get your kid an Advil in school, but they can go have a procedure that could cause irreparable harm, even death. I'm surprised they haven't been sued yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really crazy because many girls who are, in high school and so on, they don't really know what it is that is being given to them. And they're just given these pills, and it's like, oh, it's gonna be no big deal, just go take this pill. Well, even Planned Parenthood tells you on their website, when you take this pill and there's this long flushing out experience at home over your toilet, you may see a head, you may see a face come out. So we can see an ultrasound that's fairly early, first trimester in a pregnancy. We know that there is a human being in there. It literally has toes at this point. It has elbows, it has a brain, it has a heartbeat a few weeks in. So this is not going to be just like a period at home. This is going to be like pretty intense. And unfortunately, when girls underage do this and their parents have no clue what's going on, I mean, who are they going to call for help if they are in pain? It's really a horrible situation.
Right.
It's terrible.
I'm really surprised there hasn't been a case like this, where a parent, has not been informed, and their kid. I mean, I know that women have died from abortions, particularly Black women, and you talk about that, how those numbers and disproportionately affect people, Black people. What did you say? Abortion was like the leading cause of death?
It is. And many people don't talk about that. They talk about, smoking, and they talk about cancer, and we do all these other things, but abortion is our leading cause of death. And in many cities, more Black babies are aborted than born. And that's actually something that a lot of these white leftists want. It's horrible. It's horrible because they actually know that if we live in a culture of life and we transform communities and transform our world, they will probably not be in power. They thrive off of broken families and off of people kind of being dependent on them and, turning to the government, not talking to their pastor or their priest or their, husband or wife or parents or any of those people. They just want you to say, go straight to the abortionist, go straight to Planned Parenthood, talk to that person, and that person's going to give you the right message. It reminds me of Obama's video that he had put out about Julia, if you guys remember that. Basically, Julia is this kind of fake person, but she doesn't talk to any of these people for help. She only goes and talks to her doctor. And in this case, we're talking about the abortionist. So that's what the government is really pushing, basically, for you to kind of go for that. And it's really, really sad.
Right. The state meeting all needs, the dissolution of the family. I mean, these are consistent themes. To wrap it up, ironically, I'm ending on my favorite chapter, but I just wanted to make sure that we could talk about this. Feminism, modern feminism, it is so destructive. And it's interesting that one of the tenets is that you must support this empowered choice to kill. You talked about this in your book. It was just so well stated. Can you just talk about feminism, the modern feminism movement, and, is it truly empowering to take the life of an innocent human being?
Yeah. So in that chapter, I really look at, what is power? What is empowerment? Empowerment is to have power, but what does that mean? And I look at, in the case of an abortion, as the woman, you do have a lot of power because you are holding another human being's life in your hand, and you are kind of holding it over the edge of a precipice, over a cliff. And sure, you can choose to drop it off that cliff. That does mean you have a lot of power over this life, but is that the way that we should use our power as women? I would say no. That is not a good use of power. That's not empowering. I would say it's best to use your power in a way where you can lead this person to have a happy life moving forward. And oftentimes I think the left likes to act like abortion is empowerment. And it's just simply not true. It's not empowering for the child, and it's not empowering for the woman's health either moving forward. Oftentimes the left acts like, women can't have a baby. They can't, even do anything that they want to do if they have a child. And that's just not true. I mean, we have things like maternity leave where you are paid in full and can take time off and things like that. And even that, they try to demonize it as if it's an enemy of the woman, when in reality, it allows her to kind of do these two things. And I think, too, if we even look at kind of the history of the feminist movement, they really kind of started out actually as pro-lifers. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, all these women, they were pro-life, and they knew that, women's rights begin in the womb. That's where we could have our future next little girl president and so on. And so to kill off these people, that is not something they were in favor for. They wanted the women's right to vote. They wanted us to have, the same opportunities as men, but not to be able to take an innocent human's life. And unfortunately, with the 1960s and kind of this radicalization of the left and them trying to hijack the feminist movement and turn it into this warped thing where they hate men, they hate children, they hate basically any of this because they think that it's the enemy of women. When in reality, they're actually the enemy of women. They're the ones that are kind of making it so that, hey, you can't be a woman basically unless you're a man, which is of course impossible. They write things like, the darkness of the womb and how we would be free if we didn't have wombs, and, men have it so much better because they don't have a womb. And it's like, well, we don't have control over that. We are women, and we should not act like we are, physically different. That is, I think, very much a self-loathing culture they create. And unfortunately, that is kind of what's pushing this abortion movement on their side. They're pushing this movement that we should hate kind of our natural bodies and our natural abilities as child bearers. And it's actually a great gift. Even if we look at God and his power, one of his greatest powers is to create. And that is something that only women can do as far as birthing children. And so I think it's a very warped culture that they're pushing. And I think most women who've had abortions, most women that you talk to, they would not say that it's empowering. That maybe what's written in a magazine article because they found, the editor of Slate or so on to write it. But most women would not say that. And I think, unfortunately, they've moved away from this time of viewing abortion as safe, legal, and rare, and really moved to pushing it as something positive.
Yeah, to touch on that a little bit, I just want to say from a male perspective, when I think of feminism, I think of women like my wife, like you, like Amy Coney Barrett, women who are true to their beliefs, who are strong, who are empowered, who are doing great things, who are doing great work, while also fighting for children, fighting for babies. And I think, this idea of feminism has been perverted so grossly by the far left. You look at just... Now you start to hear terminology that you're a pregnant person because, of course, in the left side, a man can be pregnant. This is the same party that preaches that we need to listen to science, and they're saying that men are pregnant. Slowly, this modern feminism is actually ripping away the uniqueness of being a woman and how special and beautiful it is to be a woman. And from my perspective, I watch that, and I watch women be degraded over and over and over and over again by the modern left and their modern version of feminism. And it just makes me want to fight that much harder for us to have what is right and to truly empower women and for women to be equal, but also celebrated for their uniqueness. I want to move on for our last question and talk to you about coercion and abortion regret. For the first part of the question, on coercion, I don't think a lot of people realize how often women are coerced into having an abortion. Can you talk about that? And then also about abortion regret? Because I just think in my life experience, the left has always been afraid to face the fact or admit to the fact that anyone regrets getting an abortion. But the truth is, the vast majority of people that I've come across in real life who've had an abortion regret it. And that includes people who are Democrats that I've met. That includes people from before I was outwardly Republican. That's my entire life experience. I don't think I've ever met somebody who has had an abortion who was like, you know what, it was the best choice of my life. I'm so glad I did it. Never once. It's always people who regret it.
Right. Yeah, you see the celebrities like Michelle Williams and say, they never would regret it and so on. But is that really the reality amongst a normal person that you talk to? I would say no. And unfortunately, many of these people who do regret it, they suffer in silence. I mean, they're very ashamed to talk about it. They feel like they can't because if, someone on the left hears that, they're going to kind of say, oh, wait, does that invalidate then this kind of right to abortion and so on? And I think the reality is that most women do think about it for many years to come. Many men think about it for years to come. And that's something the left never wants to talk about. They never want to amplify those voices when it comes to their stories and things, because they know that it makes people think more about what this is. And it makes people think more about, oh, well, why would you regret it? Or why would you feel that way? Oh, well, obviously because you feel like you lost a child and so on. And they don't even want to open that can of worms to even make someone think this is a child. They have to keep the debate on, oh, it's a cluster of cells. Oh, it's a polyp. It's an appendix and so on. So anytime you start going into emotions, into, kind of the loss of a child, they just want to back away because they actually know that's very powerful. I think if more people shared their stories on that, the left would freak out because they'd say, oh my gosh, this is actually really pulling on the heartstrings, and they don't want that.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. Really great talk.
Really great book. I would recommend it to parents with high school kids. This is really important part of that whole sex ed discussion. That is omitted and actively suppressed internet, and in school. So really great job, Danielle. And thank you for writing this book. It's great.
And please tell me before you leave where they can find your book.
Yes. Well, I first want to thank you guys. I appreciate you guys having this discussion. I know it's a tough subject, and sometimes people are like, oh no, icky, I don't want to discuss this. So I appreciate it. I think it's important to do so people can kind of learn about some of the realities in our world. But yeah, you can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, ebook, Audible, any places where you like to, find books. And yeah, definitely let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. So, guys, if you're looking that book up, it's The Choice by Danielle D'Souza. Link is in the YouTube bio. Thank you so much. Have a great day. We really appreciate having you on, and we'd love to bring you back.
Thanks again, guys, for everything you do.
Oh, thank you. Bye, guys.